thinking of violence. My name is Karin Zackari, and I'm a PhD candidate in human rights studies at the Department of History at Lund University. And I mostly focus my PhD on photographs from the 70s. That was a very violent period in Thailand. But I have moved forward to contemporary photography in this paper because of how that relates to history. And that's kind of my interest in photography, how it has been used by activists and by scholars to tell history in Thailand about human rights, about atrocities. I want to start with an image that I'm not going to show you, but I want you to follow the visualization of it. On the 26th of December 2018, a body surfaced on the Mekong riverbank in northeast Thailand. 3 days later, a second body was found. Photographs circulating in the press showed the shape of a body draped in brown coarse cloth, a fishing net and rope tied around what assumedly was the head, chest, belly, legs and feet of a dead person. Reports described that the corpses had been handcuffed, their bellies opened and stuffed with concrete, put in rice sacks and dumped in the river. On the 21st and 22nd of January 2019, the police confirmed that DNA testing provided evidence that the dead persons were missing political activists known as Pushana and Kazalong. The two men had been missing from their hideaway in Laos since 11th December 2018. Together with the third man, Surasai Sedan, the men had fled from Thailand to Laos sometime after the military coup in May 2014. There were rumors that a third body, presumably of Surachai, had also surfaced from the waters, but that perhaps the police had made it disappear. The death of the three political activists and the photographs circulating in the press can be comprehended as part of a familiar story in Thailand. Arbitrary detentions, torture, extrajudicial assassinations, and forced disappearances, accompanied by impunity, has become more the expectation than the exemption of the justice system in the modern Thai nation state. The case with the bodies floating on the Mekong also points at the political power of photography. In an expose of human rights in Thailand, Chirul Haberkorn notes that there is no lack of evidence of violence and impunity in Thailand. Instead, the very publicness of the violence and the securing of impunity is key to understanding its function in the state. There is a strong relationship between the sensationalist printed press, filled with these violent crime and gore photographs, as of the body bags on the Mekong River, and the repressive violence exercised by the state. This relationship between photography and power seems to counter regular assumptions that we have about human rights activism and the uses of photography. As Susie Linfield has argued that the dialectics of photography that make it matter for the human rights movement is that photography of atrocious acts are also, quote, documents of protest that show us what happens when we unmake the world, unquote. This might be a too optimistic take on photography of suffering, as Ariella Azoulay cautions. Photography which equates the violation with the violated risks depoliticization of the violence. And looking at such photographs, we must read the traces of a discriminatory practice. Additionally, there is an expectation that photographs can be evidence in the historical trial, as Walter Benjamin wrote. While history has shown that material traces of an event does not ensure visibility. And I think that is very clearly the case in Thailand. And Thailand has a history ridden with coup d'etats, with authoritarian military regimes succeeding each other, and very short periods of democratic rule. And there has not been any transition that has included disclosure in the paradigm of historical justice. So there are no records of violence that are found in a comprehensive archive waiting there for us to kind of expose and turn against a past regime, as would be the case in Cambodia. The challenge then to both the researcher and the activist is to piece together the traces that exposes the systematic and repetitive nature of the violence and impunity. In February 2017, during authoritarian military rule, the same military rule that took power in May 2014, a photographic exhibition was shown at the Bangkok Arts and Cultural Center in central Bangkok, Thailand. The exhibition called For Those Who Died Trying, or translated from the Thai, For the Human Rights Fighters Who Died, was made by Thailand-based photographer Lund in collaboration with an NGO called Protection International, presenting supporting evidence of at least 50 cases of extrajudicial killings and forced disappearances in Thailand the past 20 years. And these are 35 photographs shot all over the country, mostly in rural areas. They all follow the same basic script. A framed photograph of a person is placed in or near the scene where they were killed or last seen before disappearing. A caption informs about the name and the title of the persons, the place and date of the alleged crime, and the causes that they were fighting. The event of violence itself is not captured, nor the suffering human prior to death, or the lifeless body as evidence of the violence committed. The victims are categorized as rurally based and collectively organized environmental and human rights activists. The causes that the victims of the violence fought are of such nature that state agencies are typically involved at some level, such as the construction of dams, illegal logging, palm oil plantations, coal factories, and coal-powered plants. The most noted case among the photographs is that of Somchai Nilapati, a lawyer, a human rights lawyer involved in lawsuits against police allegedly involved in torture in Thailand's southern provinces. It was established in court that Somchai was abducted by 5 policemen, but since no body has been found and disappearance is not a crime in the penal code, these policemen were tried for robbery and coercion, but ultimately acquitted in court. I think that is a very typical case of how impunity is produced in Thailand. It could be argued that the state not categorizing a specific type of violence and victims is part of this production of impunity, the erasure from records that could provide evidence of systematic and repetitive practices. Then, the act of framing a political category of victims as human rights defenders is a denominator over time and space to point out systematic and repeated violence. And then, so there are 2 components in these photographs that I look closer at, the portrait and the place. And seeing together what meaning can we what knowledge can we draw out of that. So photography has contributed to how we perceive place in relationship to space and time. Of course also in the modern Thai nation state, while it was building, photography was used alongside with cartography to map out the Thai nation state, what was under the rule of the king. And photography relates to the nation state, but not merely through those scientific practices, but also that the meanings, the cultural memory and identity that are inherent in the places that we look at, and the photographs of these. So while a photograph can represent a place, the meanings of that representations are not fixed, but negotiated. As part of a project to create an online archive and document memories about atrocities in the 1970s, Patpon Putong set out to find a gate to an electrical plant in Nakhon Pathom province, where 2 workers were hanged in September 1976. The death of the workers and photographs of them hanging from the gate circulated in the vernacular press. And it is commonly understood that that event was a prelude to a massacre that took place at the Thammasat University in 6 October 1976, 1 month later, a few weeks later, sorry. Though the police officers were identified as perpetrators, in the end no one was held accountable for the killings. Patwan's photograph of the gate, the red iron gate, in a now deserted industrial landscape, overtaken by vegetation, refers to photographs from the past, but also emphasizes the indexicality of those photographs. The photograph of the gate today has little, if no meaning, without the photograph from the past. It points out to us that just as there is still a gate, a place, there was and still is a crime without justice. Locating places where forced disappearances and extrajudicial killings have allegedly taken place, Luke Daggleby's photographs give seemingly nowhere space in history. The various locations that make up Daggleby's series form a visualization of interconnectedness, and as such can be seen as a representation of the Thai nation state. These are everyday places in Thailand where you can stand without seeing any indication of the violence that has taken place there. A road passing by a temple, a pineapple field, outside homes, inside homes, a mangrove forest, a dirt track leading back to the village, a garage, outside a government building, a shop house, the Thai flag blowing in the wind in the background. Together, the photographs are like red dots on a map for the onlooker to draw a line in between. Then a little bit about the portraits. The practice of bringing into the public photographs of people who have disappeared and whose death has not been officially recognized has become a worldwide phenomenon. I think this is traced back to the hunger striking Chilean women, mothers, in the 1977. And then you have these Plaza de Mayo and mothers and grandmothers in Mexico, in Kurdistan. This is also something that is used by Thai activists to commemorate particularly big events of mass violence in Thailand. The portraits in this series are of such nature that they typically would have been made in the private sphere of the family, but through the acknowledgement of killing and disappearance, the portrait and the placing of the photographs in the landscape and the new photographic frame, the memories of them find a public place. And I interviewed the photographer on how they chose the picture. He said that generally we let the family choose the photo, but most often there was only one picture anyway, the photo that had been used at the funeral cremation as is Thai tradition. However, sometimes the family only had an ID photo, especially in the older cases, so we had to scan the ID photo and print an enlarged version ourselves. In a study of power and photography in Thailand, Claire Veal looks at portraits produced and disseminated to confirm and enhance a person's so-called charismatic power. That serves as foundation and legitimization of social and political power in Thai society. Veal argues that the portrait mirrors a societal hierarchy, and the extent to which a portrait is circulated, disseminated, mirrors a person's status and power in the Thai society. On that follows that the lack of photographs of oneself is a sign of low ranking. In the cases of the murdered and disappeared rights activists, sometimes the only photograph of the person is an ID photo. The photograph is produced by state authorities with the purpose of registering state subjects. Through the photograph, the state acquires that subject. And here is a typical example of the Thai ID photo, how it is used in the series. In the series, the ID photo and the funeral portrait confirms that the dead or disappeared person has once been seen and fitted into the order of the state. In the case of activists disappearing, there is no corpse to cremate and no conclusion is officially made to their lives. The portraits belonging to the sphere of private commemoration are placed in a space accessible to the public. As such, the photograph reclaims the photographed person's place and belonging in Thailand. While the state denies the individual's right to life and justice through violence and impunity, the photograph invariably seen talks back at the state. The reproduction of hers or his photograph in a location that is a place in Thailand is a visual imprint of the being that once was in the state, not just that once was in the photograph. Now, there are some questions that I try to tackle here. I think that while these photographs aims at both raising awareness and creating a public memory, they also border the line between research and activism in the production of knowledge and challenges assumptions about the photographs as evidence of a crime, as a historical record, and as a material basis for memory. The staged photograph is a signifier of both a crime and a person's belonging. The very fact that the photograph exists indicates the death, and the place indicates a crime scene. The places are of seemingly no historical significance, yet the photographs refer to a historical continuity. And I read these photographs against assumptions commonly held by human rights activists about the political power of photography, aware that material traces do not guarantee visibility and that photography of violence risks depoliticization. I argue that through aesthetic repetition, connections are created between the cases, between the persons in the photograph and the Thai state, and between the individual instances of violence and a history of impunity in Thailand.